O'clock, I'm going to call the Coos Bay North Bend. Wow, where did that come from? I'm going back in the day. We never had, joint meeting way back. Okay, Coos Bay, it'll be the Coos Bay Urban Renewal Agency and the Planning Commission meeting, work session. And Chelsea, I think you're going to start us off with a discussion regarding Coos Bay housing policy and code audit financing findings, right? And you had that today?
I do. Just real quick, the first agenda item is public comment. Do we want to allow that first?
You want to do the public comments first?
It's up to you.
No, I really don't want to. I don't want when coming up and making comments. I'm kidding. Okay, first of all, before I start that, we have Councilor DeNovo on line and also Councilor Stevens. And there we go. Okay, public comments. Any public comments this evening?
Yes.
Of course. All right. Are we going to take public comments after any of this or not?
It's up to the council commission.
Okay. All right, let's start with the regular public comments first. All right, citizens wishing to address the City Council during this time set for public comments are requested to sign in, which they did. The public comment period is intended for the public to share ideas and concerns. It is not intended for the discussion with council, interactive discussion with council. There may be opportunities for the public comments during specific agenda items that require a public hearing. Members of the public are requested to confine their remarks to the questions or issues under discussion during this time. During any designated comment period, individuals shall not engage in personal attacks, shall not impugn the motives of any speaker, and shall at all times while in session conduct themselves in an appropriate manner. No person shall make personal, impertinent, slanderous, or unauthorized remarks or become boisterous while addressing the council. So I just want to preface this. We have a couple items here that I'm willing to open the public comments on, but if you testify here or make a public comment here, then the public comment is done. And so I think you need to keep that in mind. The first one's going to be discussion regarding Coos Bay housing policy and code audit findings. The other one's going to be a report on the Planning Commission's big box store discussion. So if you wanted to make a public comment on one of those items, I suggest you wait until that time, or you can do one on each, but so pass on this one. So is it Corin DeBert? Is that correct?
That's comment.
Sorry. So would you like to comment now, or you want to comment on the housing project or the big box stores?
So can I ask you, do you check your online comments?
Yes.
I sent you one today, this morning.
Okay.
And it specifies about what I'm here for.
Okay, so that'll be put into the record.
And I would like to bring them to you. I asked if they can do printouts, and they said once you receive it, that you would do printouts for it.
Well, we would receive them in our packets.
Pardon?
We would receive them in our packet.
In the packet.
Yeah, we got a computer and we get our agenda items in our packet. So, do you want to hand out the copies? You're more than welcome to.
I can hand it to you. You can see
Sure.
it. Okay. I'm hard of hearing, so
That's right.
it sounds like a muffle in here when I'm talking.
Thank you. So, did you want to make a comment or not?
Comment,
Public comment?
It's a public comment dealing with, I even wrote it on the board over here.
Okay. Yeah, go. So, just go to the microphone so we can get you in the record.
What song you want me to sing?
So you want to make a public comment on the housing policy? Am I correct?
On the housing project over here?
Yes.
Well, I explained that I was in the trades around here, so I do know a little bit as far as what was going on in buildings.
Okay.
And I worked on the,
so do you want to make a public comment now, or do you want to make a public comment at the housing?
to the housing, we need commerce.
Okay, so you want to make a public comment about that now then?
What he's saying is you can make a public comment now, but then you wouldn't be able to make a comment after the presentation about the housing. So did you want to wait until the presentation is made by our staff? Or do you want
I'll
to
wait till after the staff, and that way I can
Okay.
hear what
All right, I'll call you back
the
up.
thought process
All right,
would be.
thank you. Dean Lundy. Dean? It's good to see you. I haven't seen you for a while.
I know, good to see you. I'm here to share a celebration that some of us attended on June 5th at the Capitol. It's been 50 years, and the Oregon State Senate passed the bike bill. It's law. The number is 4007, and to paraphrase the law, it's law now. To paraphrase the law, every new road in the state of Oregon, ODOT is mandated, they have to provide a sidewalk and a bike path for any new road in the state of Oregon, and any major improvement on a road in the state of Oregon has to include a sidewalk and a bike path. And I didn't recognize Jennifer Wassing. This is a sign that the city of Florence used to take care of a bike lane. I'm going to give this to Jennifer Wassing. And the celebration was really amazing in Salem. Politicians were shaking hands and kissing babies. It was a big deal. And it was the unveiling, and I'll give these out to everybody. It was the unveiling of the new Oregon Coast bike route. And in our city, it has a map of each city along the coast. And in our city, they have them at our wonderful event, our visitor center has them. And the new map is really interesting, showing Coos Bay, because it shows it's really a super a different map. They show an alternate route that goes on the north side of the Empire Lakes, which is really hip to ride a bike. But it also shows an alternate route down Ocean Boulevard and 101. And I think the drums are pounding. I think ODOT, because we were talking about the urban growth district, the urban boundary district. I think ODOT is planning on making a better road out Cape Arago to Charleston. Charleston is going to be in that thing, and that would be really hip. And that major road they would be mandated, as of the law, as of June 5th, to provide us with a sidewalk and a bike path. Anyway, so we finally passed it. 50 years, and a good deal for pedestrians and bicyclists. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you, Dean. It's good to see you. Okay, is there any other public comments? You don't necessarily need to sign up, so if you'd like, this would be the time. Hearing none, we will move on. Chelsea?
Okay, thank you, Mayor. Planning Commission, City Council, good evening. Tonight we have a consultant, MIG, Matt Hasty is here with them to give a presentation on an audit of our city code and policies related to housing-related items, with the intent of gaining some direction on 5 key policy questions. And this came about from the Department of Land Conservation and Development, Housing and Accountability and Production Office. They provided a housing assistance grant to do this work, to essentially look at our code, determine whether or not it's meeting current state laws, is it clear and objective, is it allowing for all types of affordable housing production across the community. And so that's what the consultant has done, and I'll just turn it over to Matt to talk more about it.
Great. Welcome, Matt.
All right. Thank you. Thanks for having me tonight. So I'm going to do my best to share a presentation on my screen here. I usually end up sharing remotely, and I've got more than one screen, so bear with me. All right. Sorry. Okay. Awesome. All right. So far, so good. I just started at the wrong spot, but I've got the right presentation. All right. So I'm going to walk through and give you kind of an overview of the process that Chelsea just described, just in terms of kind of the background and the timeline for that, talk about some initial findings from the code audit and sort of, I'll say, preliminary recommendations, and then get your feedback on those things. And as Chelsea said, we're going to kind of talk about a few specific issues. There's a lot of detail in the the summaries of the initial code audit that we've gone through, and I'm happy to answer more questions. I'll try to say a little bit more than just sort of what's on the screen as I go through to try to explain things. But if you have questions, just let me know. And if you have questions about what was in our audit reports, there's a couple of copies of the summary audit in the back there, and I have a copy, and I think that was probably provided in advance of the meeting. So happy to answer questions, and again, kind of walk through this at a high level and just see what y'all have to think about a few of these specific questions. So, all right, so just kind of a quick introduction to the team. You know Chelsea and Kelly. You see me up here. My colleague Antonio Wellman is here in the back, helping out with this meeting and a meeting we had just before this. And then there's another person on our team, Joey Nielsen, who's doing a lot of the preparation of materials, but he actually works in our Salt Lake City office, so it's kind of far for him to come out here, so he's not here with me today. But he's doing a lot of work on the project. And then, as Chelsea mentioned, this is being funded by a grant from the state, from the Department of Land Conservation and Development. And so they have a couple folks who are supporting the project by answering questions, or if we have questions for them about, hey, are we being consistent with the state rules, or can you tell us what some other communities are doing about this? They are sort of available to help with that. So, so they're in that role. And that's somebody from their housing group, Sean Edging, and then the regional representative for this area.
So have they reviewed this already?
They have, yeah. So, and typically what they do is the regional representative kind of gives us, she gives us feedback, but it's really Sean, who's with the housing group. He reviewed this, and then we updated the draft after his review to be consistent with his comments. So yeah, and they'll keep doing that throughout. When we ask them for comments, they are happy to give us comments either on a document or just if we have individual questions, they do that. So, but yes, he has reviewed this.
So does this have to be adopted by LCDC?
No, not what you're doing. What you're doing would just be adopted ultimately by the city council.
Okay.
Yeah, reviewed by the planning commission and recommended one way or the other to city council for adoption. Yeah. But they are typically, as part of that process, because it would be a legislative amendment, an amendment to your development code, DLCD gets notice of it, they review it, and they will typically look at it and make sure from their perspective it's syncing up with state requirements. So, but hopefully, you know, by the time we get to that point in the process, they will have already reviewed the recommendations and given us a heads up if they see any issues, like well before the adoption process.
So we're not going to adopt it before they review it. We would let them review it and then come back and adopt it, or we're going to adopt it first. How does that work?
Well, right now, we're kind of at the beginning of the phase, is finding in our code what areas might need to be amended to be compliant with state law. While we're doing that, they're helping give us feedback so that we kind of stay consistent throughout the process. So when we get to the end of this, we'll get feedback from council and commission tonight. We'll have another phase where we'll come back with actual, maybe like redlined amendments so you can see what that looks like. And then we'll have our public hearings before Planning Commission and City Council where you would do the legislative adoption, and that's when DLCD formally acknowledges your amendments. So they'll
Right.
review it during the process and also officially as part of that text amendment process.
Right.
Right,
They'll
thanks.
informally review the red lines, and then they'll officially review what's put in front of you for adoption.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, go for it.
Could you give us an example of where a deficiency might look like and what you do to fix it?
Yeah, that's what kind of most of my presentation will walk through, and I'll give you, no worries. I'll give you a number of examples. Yeah. So I'll definitely get to a few of those things in just a moment. Yeah. And other just questions, I'm going to, again, kind of give you a quick overview of the process and the overall objectives, and then I'll walk through some specific issues. But do just raise your hands, interrupt me if you have questions. Happy to stop and take those. So just some overarching objectives of this process. I think one is just make sure that the code is easier to use and understand and administer. So Chelsea mentioned that standards for housing and also the processes and procedures by which you approve housing developments have to be what's called clear and objective. And that means that if two people look at an application for something and review it against your standards, they would both come to the same conclusion, that it meets the standards or doesn't. So you're not applying discretion in how you apply those standards. There's a board over there on the next over from the left that kind of describes that in a little more detail. So that's one of the things we're trying to do, is make sure that code's relatively easy to, and development codes are not always easy to understand, so we're trying to make it relatively easy to understand, and again, make sure those standards are clear and objective. And as Chelsea said, make sure that we are being consistent with state requirements. The state's adopted a lot of different housing-related legislation in the last several years, and so particularly where it's specifically relevant to the city's goals, we're making sure that we're doing that in sync with their requirements as well. And there's a number of kind of local goals and issues, or those are the things I'll talk through in a moment, that we're also trying to address, and then make sure that this information's out there and available for other folks in the community to look at and weigh in on as well. So those are kind of the overarching things. So it's an iterative process. So as Chelsea just said a moment ago, we've taken sort of this initial step of looking at your code, looking at these objectives, and identifying at kind of a high level, although it's somewhat detailed in the memo, some specific changes we would suggest considering for your code. Getting this feedback from you, and then we'll go through the process, as she said, of identifying specific changes or amendments to your development code. Have another review or work session with y'all, get feedback from the state, revise that prior to going through an adoption process. And so the goal is to be adopting this coming spring. So that's the goal. So that's the process we're going through, and this just kind of gives you a sense of when we're checking in with y'all and what those steps are. So I'm going to just pause there, see if there's any questions about the process, and then I'm going to walk through some of these specific findings and recommendations. So any quick or not quick questions, comments before I get into the meat of it?
Doesn't look like it. Any questions, anyone? No?
Okay.
Online? No?
All right, awesome.
Thank you.
So I've got to think about 5 things to walk through here. So one of them has to do with what are referred to as middle housing standards. So middle housing is basically housing that's somewhere between essentially a duplex and an apartment complex. And so it tends to be triplexes, quadplexes, small groups of row houses, or what are called cottage cluster housing. And your code allows these things now, but in some cases it defines them and has standards that are pretty specific to them, cottage clusters being the primary example. But it doesn't clearly or specifically define triplexes and quadplexes in particular, and it applies the same set of design and development standards to anything that's 3 units or more. So, and some of those standards really over time have been prepared to really be more, frankly, applicable or appropriate to larger developments. So things that say, for instance, the facade or surface of a building has to vary so much over so many feet because those tend to be larger buildings, or that you have to have a certain amount of open space or recreational space within the development. Some of the requirements around where parking is located. So some of those things are pretty appropriate for larger scale developments, but they don't work as well for smaller scale things like triplexes, quadplexes, or small row house kind of developments. So there's a couple of recommendations here. One is to just clearly define those things in your code. And 2 is to allow more of those things to occur in your low-density residential and small lot residential zones, so to allow triplexes and quadplexes in particular in those zones, and on relatively smaller lots. So I will say that a lot of codes require like the same amount of space for each unit of triplex as you would for 3 individual houses. And that makes that triplex, frankly, no one's going to develop it because they can't sell the unit for as much. The land costs the same per unit. So the recommendation here is to allow those things to occur in more places and in smaller spaces to make them financially feasible to be able to develop. And I'll also say all of this is really kind of about just providing more housing choices or options for folks. It does sometimes make things a little more compact, but that's not really the overall goal. It's just to allow different forms, some of which are not always, but can be less costly to build. So that's kind of the first set of questions or suggestions. And then I've got a couple more related to middle housing on the next slide. So maybe I'll pause there. I'll also say these boards ask some of these same questions. So if anybody wants to get up at all later in the meeting and put some dots on there, feel free. But any thoughts on these couple of suggestions before I go to the next ones?
Yeah, just
Yeah.
kind of discussion thoughts. What was the history or reason for not allowing triplexes or quadplexes in low-density residential or small lot residential? Is there a purpose or a basis behind that?
I mean, I'm not sure the reasoning here. I would say it's pretty common. It's been pretty common around the state. A couple things have happened around the state. Prior to zoning laws going into effect in kind of the 50s through 70s, a lot of these forms of housing were allowed all over the place. So if you go into a lot of communities, I'm working on a similar project in Independence, and if you walk around in older neighborhoods there, you see duplexes, you see triplexes. They were just built a long time ago before they were not allowed. And I think as zoning sort of evolved in this state and others, there was sort of a desire to like separate things out. So in this neighborhood, we're only going to have individual homes on individual lots. We're not going to allow these other things to get mixed in. And we're going to put those things in some other part of the city that we're going to call like a medium density zone or a high density zone. We're only going to allow apartments over here. And that, I think, is just kind of how zoning has evolved in a lot of communities, Coos Bay being one of them, but, you know, across the state and across the country to a degree. And so I think what's been happening in the state and others, Washington's had a lot of similar changes in their zoning requirements, is to say, hey, maybe it's okay to kind of mix these things in a little bit more in individual or existing neighborhoods and allow these things to occur. But again, if you're going to allow them to occur, you have to sort of think about what's going to be financially feasible. So that was a pretty long answer, and I don't know that that tells the whole story for Coos Bay.
Well, it was helpful. I mean, but
Yeah.
isn't this essentially, we were just talking about mixed-use neighborhoods, basically?
I would
to get
say
high-level
mixed use and
apartments,
mixed use in terms
multiple
of
use?
it's still, you still wouldn't allow necessarily apartments, anything like 5 units or more, other than what's called like cottage cluster housing. You still wouldn't necessarily allow those in every single residential zone, but you would allow a triplex, a quadplex, and a small group of row houses in more places. And again, at with each unit taking up less space compared to an individual home on an individual lot.
Okay.
Yeah, that's sort of the proposal. And I don't know, do you have anything to add?
So in a nutshell, it just gives us more flexibility.
Yes.
So Chelsea,
That's
didn't
what I
we
said.
allow, I don't know, was this a residential zone where we did the nineplex out in Empire?
That's a good question. It might be a commercial zone. I can't recall.
Okay,
Right off of Newmark, feels
Okay.
commercial. to
so
me,
that's why
but-
the nineplex was allowed there then? Because it's, I mean, really close to the residential stuff.
We do have, though, an allowance for row houses or zero lot line residential development
Right.
in our residential zones.
Okay.
So like that is allowed. Our current conundrum is we have single-family dwellings, duplexes, multifamily, which is 3 or more, and then row houses. We don't differentiate triplexes, the 3 units or the 4 units, which means, like Matt said, you have to, that middle housing option has to meet the higher apartment design standards, which can be cost, like a barrier.
So if we recommend this, just generally speaking, most developers or builders would like that. They would see this as a benefit.
I mean, I think if that's a form of housing that they want to develop and have a market for, then yes, they would see it as a benefit. And I think that's the other thing is these are only ever going to make up a certain percentage of your housing market because not a lot of people do want to just live in a single house on an individual lot. But this does give an option both for folks who own property and developers. And I think from that perspective, yes, developers would like to see the options. And again, see the options make sense financially.
If I'm a neighbor, what would be the negative? If I'm playing devil's advocate, I bought a house in a housing development, what would be the negative?
I mean,
What would I
you
be
just
mad
see
about?
more people on your street.
More roads, I mean, more cars, more people.
You would potentially see more cars, yeah. And again, I think it really does depend on sort of the extent or scale of it or how much occurs. But yeah, I mean, that's what people are generally going to be concerned about. Yeah.
From a sort of a real estate point of view, I mean, not judging whether it's good or bad or who, but it basically, people that have a nice big house and a big lot don't want a triplex on a small lot across the street. I mean, let's just face it. I mean, that's not, that's not their wish. Whether we care whether that's a wish or not is another matter. But it's sort of a baked-in prejudice, I think. I mean, that's just my thought on the thing of selling activities.
I think that's certainly true some of the time, maybe even most of the time. I mean, I live in a neighborhood that's mostly, they're not huge lots, but they're mostly individual homes. I had a lot developed across the street for a duplex. I think it's just fine. Again, the scale isn't that different than what my house is, so I don't disagree.
But you're a smart, broad-minded guy. So, I can say that.
But yeah, some people object to that.
That
So yeah,
might be one place, yeah.
yeah.
Just a clarification, that row housing that we saw off of Wasson was on commercial C2. Yeah.
And maybe Jim can answer this question, because I was, questioning, probably another point would be the value. So if something developed like that across in a single family, the perception is that maybe the value of my single family might go down with the development of a multi-family triplex or quadplex or row.
The reason that it took so long to get a manufactured home anywhere, because people didn't want them across the street. And, that's just how people think, whether it's, like I say, whether it's a good Christian way to look at it or not. It's, I think, kind of a fact of life.
I just had a message to remind everyone to speak in their mics so folks online have the ability to hear. So,
And that may or may not be true, but that was the perception back in the day when my parents owned a very large house. But this day and age, I think it's probably a lot less, and it makes more sense when we have a housing crisis.
I have a slightly different question.
Yeah.
You mentioned recreation space requirement percentages. What would...
So that's something you typically, or that you currently do apply to multi-unit development. So that's essentially saying that, well, if you've got a larger development with a lot of units, again, typically going to be apartments, that you provide some space within there for
Just like play
recreation.
structures?
I mean, for people to hang out or exercise or whatever, because they don't have big yards, right? They have smaller units, smaller apartments, so you make sure that there's at least some space in there for some recreational space. But that standard doesn't necessarily make as much sense, or it makes it harder. It's harder to apply that to like a triplex or a quadplex. It's not that you couldn't, but it's something that's less typically applied to that form of housing because of the scale, and more typically applied to a larger scale development.
So it might look like something in that top photograph there, yes?
Yeah, that top photograph is of sort of a specific kind of housing type or development, which you do allow. It's called cottage cluster housing. And if someone wants to build that kind of housing, it basically, it consists of like several smaller homes typically, and they're oriented around a common open space or courtyard or space like that. And so that's just one of the requirements of that form of housing. So that would still be in place, because that's sort of how that kind of housing is defined. You just wouldn't require that for every triplex or every quadplex that was developed.
Okay.
It's not that somebody couldn't do it, and you still have and would apply lot coverage requirements to that form of housing, and that ensures that there is some space that's not covered by pavement or a building, that you've got some landscaping, still have setback requirements. So you'd still have some basic requirements like that that would apply to those things, but not necessarily that recreational space requirement.
Are lot coverage requirements separate from recreation space requirements?
Yes.
Or are they, okay.
They're separate, yeah. And there's typically, those will sometimes vary by zone or by type of housing, but yeah, I think all forms of housing in all your zones have some kind of lot coverage requirement.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, yep.
Anyone else?
So when you say a row house,
Uh-huh,
I'm not familiar with that term.
R-
I'm looking at it
yeah.
from more of a building code standpoint, and I'm looking at the bottom photograph on there.
That's a row house.
To me, that looks more like a townhouse.
Yeah, I will say,
This is a totally different animal from a quad or a triplex as far as the building code goes. And from a constructability standpoint, it's the quads and the triplexes are way more restrictive because they fall under the jurisdiction of the structural code rather than the residential code, which a townhouse would fall under. So, but you're lumping both of those together in your middle housing standard?
well, I'm saying middle housing can include, and often is defined to include, townhouses or row houses, as well as triplexes and quadplexes. It doesn't mean that the building code standards are the same for those different types of housing, but I will say that, like, appearance-wise, often they look the same. A triplex often can look like anyway, a 3-unit row house or townhouse.
As a developer, though, a townhouse looks way more enticing to me because it's in a, shall I say, less restrictive code. From a
In terms of the
constructability
building
standpoint.
code, yeah.
So I see that more often as far as current development.
Yeah,
go.
yeah. Yeah, I wouldn't disagree.
Can I just one more time? So sorry. We need to speak in our mics because the folks online can't hear.
Oh yeah, you guys gotta push the button. There you go.
Thank you.
It sounds
Other-
like we got a good menu going, but
All right.
I'd like to hear more.
Okay. So a couple more thoughts about middle housing. I already talked about the second one a little bit, which is to apply a more focused, scale-appropriate set of design standards to middle housing. So I already sort of mentioned that. That's don't apply those recreational space standards to just a triplex or a quadplex. Don't necessarily apply all the same standards that you apply to a larger development that's related to the design of the building. The other potential thing you could do would be to reduce the minimum off-street standards for parking for middle housing. Those tend to be smaller, and they tend to have fewer people living in them. And so a lot of communities that allow them don't require as many off-street parking spaces for each unit as they would for a single home on a single lot. And part of that is because there typically are less vehicles, but the other part is because if you require, let's say, 2 spaces off-street per unit, that starts to be a lot of space devoted to parking, and it starts to make, again, that form of housing pretty tough to build from a financial feasibility perspective. So, so that's another set of recommendations around middle housing. So always a fun one for me to talk about parking. There's
So
always
these are
a lot
just
of
recommendations that's going to go, if I understand correctly, this will come before the Planning Commission and before the council, right?
Correct. Yeah, and these are initial recommendations from that code audit. And so our recommendation is to come back with some proposed changes to your standards related to all these things, and then let you take another look at them, another crack at them. But we want to make sure, okay, that makes sense to look at this thing. So
I can see this off-street parking be a problem. If you have 5 of these houses on a block and you're going to have off-street parking, and we don't know how many people are going to live in it. You say 1 or 2, but how many? I mean, I've seen places that are going to be problematic that we've had. So, I don't know, I guess it's going to be a discussion for the Planning Commission and the council in the future. So, these are just recommendations, that's why I want to make sure that everyone understands.
I was
this will be coming before us.
going to ask too, with regards to that, in some places like in Empire where we don't, I mean, that's basically what we have is off-street parking. You know, just that first block of, we have an apartment and row houses, and we have parking issues on that particular street. It doesn't reduce the number of vehicles. They still have the same number, but there's vehicles parked there all the time, and there's commercial businesses there, there's a post office, and those are affected as well by off-street parking. I really do agree we're going to have issues with this if you have, you know, a lot of that going through.
You know, it'd be interesting to know how many single, you know, people, 2 people in the household, how many of those have 3 cars? I mean, it's, you know, with, you know, you got to have that truck, or, you know, all the ATV around, you know, it's, so I think there's sort of some social, economic issues, sort of things that have changed since the original notions about things like off-street parking and numbers of people, the family driving the car, and all that kind of stuff. It's just different now.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, the ideal thing would be able to control the parking and all that stuff. But I guess my point being, these are recommendations, and of course, I'm going to depend on the Planning Commission coming back with the right answer here, right?
Well, we
a
typically
recommendation.
do, of course.
Okay. Any more questions about this? Sorry, I opened a can of worms,
But I did hear some concerns about that,
Sure.
that topic in particular, the amount of off-street parking that's required. So, and I will note Antonio's taking notes back there as well.
Okay.
So, yeah. So another set of recommendations has to do with allowing what are called live-work units in residential areas. So you allow now home occupations in some of these areas, and they're subject to specific standards that relate to things that have impacts. So, you know, number of employees and number of amount of visitation to them and things like that. Live-work units are kind of units that are designed to have somebody working and living in them. So often that's going to be like the front part of the unit is an office, or not an office, but a business of some sort, and the back part's a dwelling, or it could be the first floors is for the business and the upper floors for a dwelling. And they're individual units, so it's not really like quite the same as like a mixed-use development where you've got a whole row of business on the first floor and apartments on the upper floors. It's more, these are like individual units. So there's a couple questions here. And part of the issue here, and Chelsea, feel free to jump in if you need to add to this, but part of the issue here is that to some degree your zoning code standards don't sync up with the building code standards around live-work units. So want to make sure that if you're allowing these, that those things sync up. So there's some potential changes needed to your zoning code standards to ensure that. One of them has to do with the percentage of the unit that can be used as a resident. So that's a thing we would want to look at. And, you know, I think if we're going to update your code to allow those, we would want to have some requirements related to things that could impact surrounding neighbors, like, again, whether or not there's other employees working there, whether or not, if there are, is there additional parking, things of that nature. So there need to be some standards along with just defining and allowing them to address those types of things. Yes?
Sorry to keep bothering you.
No, not at all. That's why I'm here.
Does,
Yeah.
you know, one of the things that, because in my mentioned little discussion a few minutes ago, that I didn't even bother to talk about the boat and the trailer and that stuff. And I guess what would make sense to me is in some of these areas to create a piece of it somewhere which would allow for those kinds of things to be parked sort of on campus, but not
Sure.
right in front of the house.
Right, yeah.
And I think, I'm not sure financially how that works, but I certainly think it makes sense when you were driving down the street and you're past two, decent-sized trailers and a boat and a few other things parked out in front, along with the 2 or 3 cars. They all came from one house. The rest of them have, where do they go?
Yeah, so as you're kind of looking at development of a larger area, allowing for some shared space for parking those kind of vehicles as part of the development.
As perhaps
Yeah,
some kind of a mitigating idea if you're
okay.
Well, anyway.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
Hey, can I just, sorry, one more time? It's really hard to hear online, and it's not only important for us to be able to hear who are joining virtually, but also on average 60 people that watch this meeting afterwards. So if folks could just speak into their mic, I would really appreciate it.
Well, I'm sorry, because I'm really sorry you missed that. Anyway, thank you. We'll be better.
Jim, just pull the mic closer. It'll probably resolve a lot of it. It's
Yeah,
movable.
the
Just
cords
whole-
should be
the whole
long
thing will
enough
move.
that you could bring them
Just
clear
moves.
to
There
the edge of your desk.
All right, any other thoughts on this one? I will also note that on this kind of a related topic, we had some information in our memo about allowing for homes on smaller lots in commercial areas. That is something that you recently, I think, updated your code to allow. So you do allow homes on lots smaller than 15,000 square feet, undeveloped lots 15,000 square feet or smaller in commercial areas. So that's kind of already taken care of, I guess. I guess the only question would be, well, I guess if somebody has a lot, it's developed, they demolish the thing that was there, and then is it undeveloped now? I don't know. But other than that, I think that one's been sort of addressed by the earlier code amendments. So I just wanted to note that because it's something that we talked about in the memo. So did I get that close enough? Okay. All right, I'm going to go to the next one. I mentioned earlier that you do have standards now that you apply to essentially anything that's 3 units or more that's called multi-unit housing. Some of these standards will need to be updated because they're not considered clear and objective. So back to my comments about clear and objective standards earlier, that they have to be things that are essentially measurable, that don't require discretion to administer them or determine if someone's meeting them. So I think the question here, there's a number of different things that those standards for multi-unit development or multi-unit housing can apply to. Access and parking location, how you get into a site where the cars are parked, landscaping, percentage of landscaping or type of landscaping, how much of a building that faces the street or the face of a building that faces the street is covered by windows. Articulation, that just means like if you're looking at the front of a building, is the whole thing flat or does it kind of bump in or out to provide some architectural variability or interest? Private open space, we talked about that earlier, and there can be other standards too. Some cities go all the way towards like having themes for architectural design. So think of Sisters. How many folks here have driven through Sisters? Yeah, a number of you. So they have these Western design themes. So like actually, fun fact, that was come up with back in the 50s by somebody who wanted to make this place sort of unique and attractive. It's not how that place always looked, but now it looks that way. But we're not talking necessarily about that. We're really more talking about some basic things that ensure some consistency, some architectural quality, and also just promote people's ability to walk around and get to their units and within the site. So I guess the question here is if you have any thoughts about the things that are listed on this slide where I say which of these are most important to you, that'd be great to know. If you think those all make sense, that's great. But any thoughts on this one, that's sort of the question.
So we don't have any of these in place now?
You do actually have a lot of these in place right now. I don't know about every one of them, but most of them. Mostly this is just we need to update them to make sure that they're applied in a clear and objective way. I think that's probably fair to say. And the other thing is just, as I talked about earlier, not apply all of them to triplexes and quadplexes where they don't make sense to apply to that scale of housing. So that's really the main issue here. not necessarily to apply them or not, but like as we're looking at them, is there anything that like, oh yeah, that's really important to retain in some fashion?
You want
that-
that now, or you want it come when it goes before the planning?
Either
commission?
way, if you have any initial thoughts about any of this, love to hear it now. But if also, it's fine to hold off. I'm just trying to like get a sense for some of these things of any initial thoughts on it.
Well, I think we discussed parking in the previous issue before, so I think access and parking for sure. Anyone else want to talk about? I mean, all these or what?
Well, I would say, the look of the exterior too, if you're talking about putting these into, residential areas, when we're talking about values, if you just put up, a cheap hardy plank, it's hard to differentiate between, that or like a storage unit. I'm just looking at Empire as an example. So I think, some of that design in the exterior is kind of important to keep the aesthetic and the value of those areas up. At least
and
just my opinion.
Building materials is one of the things that you can specify in your code.
So I don't know. There can be a lot of discussion around this, and I think this format is going to be difficult for us to address all of them. So I think what we have in place is to go before the Planning Commission and then come back before the council, and we can discuss this in more detail at that time, unless anyone disagrees. Because we can be here for a long time discussing this. Yeah.
Maybe
All right.
we should gather our thoughts and then.
We won't go too crazy on this one today.
Right.
All right. I will move on. This is one of my last ones, I think. So this has to do with public facility standards, and mainly when I say that, I mean standards for street, sidewalk, curb, and gutter that you apply to infill development where you've maybe got a new house or a couple of houses going in, and maybe on either side of them there are not curb, gutter, and sidewalk. Do you want to apply that standard to the new infill house, or do you want to, when it might make that project financially infeasible, or do you want to think about some potential exemptions or reduced standards for that type of development? Or the other alternative that we identified in the memo is say, hey, you either need to meet the city's public works standards for this, or you, at the option, you can work with the city through a discretionary process to figure out an alternative. But that's kind of at your option, and that's going to be a discretionary process. So those are some questions and options around that. Chelsea, anything to add?
This is nothing new to us.
Yeah.
It's a tough one.
Yeah, and I'll just add, staff has been working over the last year to come up with like an acceptable minimum level standard for infill residential development. So I think we've got that everybody's comfortable with, and so maybe that can be incorporated into this.
And brought back.
Proposal.
Yeah, what I think is important also, we need to keep in mind, a lot of this is coming before us, but we're updating our development code now. And so, I mean, Chelsea's been working on this in the planning department, and Kelly for, I don't know how long, a year, 2 years? It's been a while.
Yeah, we've recently done some comprehensive updates. I think the difference here is this is very housing focused.
Right.
Yeah,
So,
mostly
but
it is.
this would be the time to bring this about.
Yes.
Yeah, if there's other things that we can kind of weave into this that you've already come up with, that's great. And I think so.
I just know that we've faced this challenge.
So are we talking about a vacant lot that's on a city block, on a gravel road, with houses on both sides? Are we talking about an unimproved, heavily wooded city block that no one's entered yet before? I mean, it seems like each one of these infill scenarios is a special case to me. So applying a clear and objective for each individual, which almost begs discretion to some extent.
It can be hard. I think that's part of the point, is like topography can make it harder to apply the same standard to every type of development. So I guess there's a couple options. One is to apply this minimum standard to everything. Two is to say, we're going to apply this minimum standard. If you have good reasons to show that you can't feasibly meet that standard and you want to go through a tailored or discretionary process to work with the city and the Public Works Department to come up with an alternative to that, that's another option, but recognize that's going to be a discretionary process specific to your property or your situation. I mean, that is something that you can do and that other communities do, because they do know that in some cases it's really hard to meet the standard, even the minimum one. So I don't know. Does that help? Does that help? Yeah, I agree with your point. So.
Can you give me an example of a discretionary solution?
Yeah, so again, I'll go back to this project I've been working on in Independence. They've got some roads there where it's like the roads are super narrow, and so they're not going to be able to meet the standard for the width of the street simply because of the width of the right-of-way. And so in those cases, the Public Works Department can say, okay, we recognize you don't have enough right-of-way or land here to build a road this wide. We're going to allow you to build a narrow road. Or it might be that there's train tracks over here, and you can't build a sidewalk on that side of the street, so we're going to recognize that and say, okay, you don't have to do that in this case. Or it might be that the porches on either side of your house veer. They're not supposed to, but they veer into the right-of-way, and so we're going to let you kind of curve the sidewalk or something like that. So, I mean, those are kind of examples of where you might go through and come up with some creative solution to address a unique set of circumstances.
I think creative is a very good term.
Yeah, I mean, and that would be sort of the point of that alternative pathway, is to be a little more creative if you can't meet those minimum standards. So does that generally sound good? Okay, awesome. That was my last substantive issue to ask you about. So this is the obligatory next step slide. So yeah, our next step is we actually prepared, an initial draft of this code audit report, and we're going to update it based on comments. We've already done some updating based on comments from staff. There's a few more changes we need to make, address some of the things we heard from you all tonight to the extent they were definitive, hey, we're concerned about this, or not sure we want to go down this path. Then we'll draft a set of amendments or changes to the code, as Chelsea mentioned, meet with you again in the fall, similar kind of work session. Planning Commission, I can't remember if it's assumed to be a joint work session or if we meet with the Planning Commission and then council.
I think it's
remind
presumed
me.
to be joint.
Joint, that's the plan. And then revise those amendments based on the feedback we get, and then go through that adoption process subsequently. So that's what's coming up next on this project for y'all.
All right. Is there any questions for Matt at this time?
Thank you.
All right.
I think
Excellent.
that seems to be the case. Anyone online? Any comments? No? All right.
Thank you, Matt, for
Yes.
taking the time to go through that.
Absolutely. Thank you. I'm just trying to stop my sharing. Oh, there it is. I lose track of the mouse. Yeah. You can just disable me as a host, and then it'll go away. Maybe? No, I'll figure it out in a second and make it go away. All right. Thank you.
Okay. So, Mr. DeBert, you wanted to make a public comment at this time, and I guess it's in regards to, say, right-of-way hazard. Is that correct? Did you want to make a public comment?
Public comment on what he was talking about?
Well, yes, this would be the time to make your public comment, if you want to.
Like he was talking about, where
You need to come up to the mic and give us your name, please. I'm sorry, we just have a process that needs to be on the record, so.
I was listening to Derek, and he's saying that maybe it's something that you guys need to kick around more in detail.
Okay, and also, there's 3 minutes, so you know. Okay, so I think Nicole will keep track of the time and let you know.
So that's all I was sitting back listening to, is that there's more information that needs to be passed around. There's going to be street parking as far as the gravel versus asphalt, and all the amenities you need for residential believe it or not, I was here for a personal reason, but that's okay.
Okay.
Like I said, you've got my online.
Yes, we do. And I'll make sure, I'll follow up to make sure we all have this.
Okay, because mine deals with residents that we have now.
Okay.
And my neighborhood and issues that are going on.
You're
over on
welcome to share that with us
Yeah, if
right
you'd
now.
like.
This is your opportunity to
Oh,
do
is
that.
it?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, I thought we were just talking about the
Well, we
development.
did, but you could have mentioned the public comments, and I think there's some confusion. So this
Okay.
is more, go ahead.
So right now, there's issues going on North 2nd Street. It's been going since 2012, when I came down and notified the city about it and filled out a concerned citizen's complaint. And since then, we've had trees that have fallen into the street. I've had renters that have moved out of my building that's up there on North 2nd, backside of Telegraph, facing the bay. Nice area. And this wall is completely rotted out. I had 2 engineers where I was required by the city to hire to come in to put a carport that cost me $200,000, threatened by the city if I didn't do these things. Jump all the hurdles. And then when I talked with Jennifer, and it's nothing against Jennifer, said, well, that was the old group of people that were here, and now they got another group that's working the public works. And it'd be a lot easier. Well, nothing's been easy. Right now I've got, the dirt has come out into the road. It's a 16-foot, 4 feet out from the side so one car can get by. Now my brand new $200,000 driveway is being used for cars to pull in so other cars can go by. It's aggravating, and no one wants to hear the issues that are going on. And there's 100-foot fir trees that were left. They took everything else out on the hill, and it's Jeff McEwen's property, if you know where it is. And these trees are aimed at my house.
1 minute.
So it's hard for me, after 2012 to this day, to see how all this is going on, and I'm just told, sit and wait. 2 weeks. Sit and wait. 2 weeks. I understand that Jennifer can only tell me what she is able to offer me. My thing is I've also called the state. I've dealt with other people trying to figure out what to do. Another person is John Sweet, the commissioner. He told me to go out and get an attorney. He knows me personally. I'm trying to take care of this matter for the area that I live in so that the city will hopefully get somebody in there before it starts raining, because they took all the canopy out. The canopy is now bare land, erosion, and that wall is going to come down. I can just see somebody's going to get hurt and dead. And then when I come down, testify, and show all my documentation, took a video today to show what I'm talking about. So anyway, when you're interested, you read I got my phone number on there. Feel free to call me. You all get a copy, he said. But it's heartbreaking, because I'm trying to stop something that's going to hurt someone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, anyway, just a quick thing on this. I know that the city is aware of this, and they've been working on it, and they will continue to work on it, and hopefully we can get it all resolved. Anyway, I'll leave it at that. So next item on the agenda for us this evening is report on the Planning Commission big box store discussion. Chelsea.
Yes.
You're it tonight.
Thank you, Mayor. So Planning Commission heard staff's report presentation on big box store implications for Coos Bay back at their July 14th meeting. And we're asked the same question that council was asked, is this a problem? Do we need to look at regulating this? And ultimately the consensus was that big box store development in our community is not a problem. They did suggest it would be interesting to explore dark store prevention ordinance and what that was. And so I'll have to take some heat. My assumption when doing this research was that dark store prevention ordinances were something that we could implement at the front end of a land use approval. You're coming to town, you're this big store, we're afraid that you're going to leave. Let's put into place some restrictions, bond requirements, reuse agreements. When I went to research that more recently, what that is not a preventative measure, but is exactly what City Council has already done. It's taking care of blighted and vacant buildings. And so Council has adopted that ordinance. And the reason why you can't, it just gets into law. The city can't require a business to do something before there's a problem. You kind of got to give that due process and wait. And so The good news is council's already taken care of it, and so I apologize for presuming it to be something it's not. But so for Planning Commission's consideration, council has already addressed and adopted an ordinance to address the blighted and vacant properties. So that's being done. But in summary, they did not feel it was a problem, that we needed to go down a path of coming up with any more regulations.
Okay, so just to let's see, recap our council meeting. Our council meeting asked that the Planning Commission review this and get their opinion. I think that we've gotten that. And so that satisfies, I would hope, the council that asked us to go back to Planning Commission to get their opinion. And I guess since we have the Planning Commission here, did you want to add anything to what's been presented?
I would just like to thank Chelsea for making that clarification.
Okay. All right. So is council satisfied that we have done what was asked of us, or that we asked the staff to do? Go back to the Planning Commission and get a recommendation? Are we all satisfied?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Any other comments from the council on this or the Planning Commission? Hearing none, then the topic will move on. With that being the case, we have nothing else before the work session. And so I want to thank the Planning Commission in meeting, and I want to thank you in advance for addressing the housing policy and code audit that you'll be dealing with. I know it's not going to be an easy task, but it'll be one that's definitely going to be worthwhile and will help us in our housing needs. So thank you so much. And I want to thank staff, and I want to thank the council. And with that being the case, I'll adjourn the meeting.